The phone rang at 11:47 on a Thursday night in November. Garrett Malone almost didn't answer. He was sitting in the kitchen of his farmhouse outside Harlow, Montana, a bottle of beer going warm on the table beside him, the television in the next room playing to nobody. The window above the sink showed nothing but darkness and the faint outline of the barn, and the wind was doing what Montana wind does in November, pressing against the glass like it wanted in. The phone lit up. Unknown number. Garrett stared at it. He was 44 years old, and he had learned a long time ago that unknown numbers after 11 at night were never good news. They were drunk strangers, wrong dials, collect calls from county lockup. He had received all of those. He had also received the kind of call that changes the shape of your life, and somewhere in the part of him that had survived long enough to develop instincts worth trusting, something told him this was one of those. 3 rings. His thumb hovered over the decline button. He picked up. The voice on the other end was so small it barely carried through the phone. It was a child's voice barely above a whisper, wet with crying, shaking in a way that told him she had been holding the tears back for a long time before she finally let herself make this call. Mr. Iron. Garrett sat up straight. His beer hit the floor. He did not notice. He broke my arm. Everything inside Garrett Malone went cold, then hot, then something beyond temperature, entirely something that lived in the oldest, darkest part of a man's chest and only woke up when a child was in danger. Chloe, his voice came out steady because he made it steady. Chloe, where are you right now? I'm in the closet, a small sound, half breath, half sob. The hallway closet. He doesn't know I have Mommy's old phone. She kept it in the coat pocket. Where is he now? Gone. His truck is gone. I heard him leave. Where's your mom? At work. She works nights. Brett was supposed to watch me. A pause, then quieter. Mr. Iron, it hurts so bad. Please come get me. Garrett was already standing, already moving toward the door. His keys were in his hand before he had consciously decided to reach for them. I'm coming right now. You stay in that closet and you do not open the door for anyone except me. You understand me? Yes. I'll be there in 5 minutes. Keep this phone. Don't hang up. He was on his motorcycle in 40 seconds flat. The engine shattered the silence of the Montana night like a gunshot. He did not bother with a helmet. He did not bother with anything except the road ahead of him and the small shaking voice still coming through the phone in his jacket pocket, and the old ancient primal thing that had woken up in his chest and was now fully, completely awake. He called Devlin Ashby on the way. Devlin picked up on the first ring. That was Devlin, always awake, always ready. 18 years of brotherhood, and the man had never once let a call go to voicemail when it mattered. Dev, get up. It's Chloe. A beat of silence. Then Devlin's voice changed completely, not louder but harder. The voice of a man who had his own history with the dark side of closed doors and things that happened inside houses where children were supposed to be safe. What happened? Brett, he hurt her, broke her arm. She's alone in the house. The silence this time was different. Colder. I'm on my way, Devlin said. Don't do anything before I get there, Garrett. No promises. But Garrett had already hung up. He made the 7-minute ride in 4. The street Chloe and her mother lived on was quiet in the way that streets are quiet in small Montana towns. After midnight, not peaceful, just empty, the houses dark, the porches unlit. The whole neighborhood turned inward against the cold. Nora Webb's house was a rental, a small white 2-story with a gravel driveway and a porch light she always left on when she worked nights, so Chloe wouldn't wake up to darkness. The porch light was on. Brett Coulter's truck was gone. Garrett parked at the curb and walked to the front door. It was unlocked. He pushed it open and stepped inside. Chloe. He kept his voice low and steady. It's Mr. Iron. I'm here. For a moment there was nothing, just the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the wall clock in the catch, and then the hallway closet door opened an inch. A pair of eyes appeared in the crack, Blue red rim swollen from crying, squinting against even the dim light of the hallway nightlight. A child's eyes, 5 years old, holding herself together in a dark closet in the middle of the night because there was nobody else. "You came," she whispered. "I told you I would." She opened the door wider. Garrett looked at her arm. His vision went red. Her left forearm was bent at an angle that had no business existing on a human body. The skin was already swollen, turning purple in real time, the discoloration spreading from her wrist toward her elbow. She was holding it against her chest with her right hand cradling it the way you would cradle something broken and precious that you were terrified of dropping. There was a bruise on her cheek, a handprint, a grown man's handprint on a 5-year-old girl's face, the impression of 4 fingers along her cheekbone, a thumb beneath her eye, clear enough to count. Garrett Malone had broken jaws. He had shattered ribs. He had put men in hospitals, and he had walked away from those nights without losing a minute of sleep because those men had made their choices and he had made his, and the math had always seemed simple enough. He was not a man who frightened easily, and he was not a man who was often lost for what to do next. He knelt down in front of her. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from the effort of keeping himself in this room instead of getting back on his motorcycle and hunting Brett Coulter down like an animal. "I'm going to pick you up now," he said. "I'll be very careful, very gentle." Chloe nodded. She reached for him with her good arm. And Garrett Malone, a man the Hells Angels called Iron, because nothing had ever managed to break him, the man with a criminal record longer than most people's resumes, a man who had spent more nights in jail cells than hotel rooms, lifted that little girl as gently as though she were made of something that would shatter at the wrong breath. She weighed almost nothing. She was so small against his chest. Her good hand found the lapel of his leather vest and held on. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Hospital. They're going to fix your arm." "Will it hurt?" He carried her toward the door. "Maybe a little, but I'll be right there. I'm not going anywhere." Devlin's truck was pulling up to the curb as Garrett stepped off the porch. Devlin climbed out and took one look at Chloe's arm in the yellow light from the porch. His face went to stone. Not the stone of a man who wasn't feeling anything. The stone of a man who was feeling too much and had spent a lifetime learning how to not let it show. He opened the back door without a word. Garrett climbed in with Chloe on his lap. She pressed her face against his chest. Her whole body was trembling, not crying anymore, just trembling, the deep, fine shaking of a child in shock. Devlin pulled away from the curb slowly and steadily. No sirens, no drama, just the quiet urgency of a man who understood that the most important thing in this truck right now was not speed but stillness. "Chloe," Devlin said from the front seat. His voice was softer than Garrett had ever heard it. "Can you tell us what happened?" A long pause. Then Brett got mad. What was he mad about? "I spilled my juice on the carpet. It was an accident. I said sorry. I said sorry 2 times, but he got really, really mad. He was yelling." She stopped, drew a breath that shuddered all the way through her. "He grabbed my arm, both hands, and he twisted it like this." She made a turning motion with her good hand, her small wrist rotating. "And I heard it crack, like a stick breaking. And then it hurt so bad I screamed. And he let go." The truck went very quiet. "What did he say after that?" Garrett asked. He kept his voice to a murmur. "Did he say anything to you?" Another long pause. "He said if I told anyone, he'd hurt Mommy." Her voice had gone flat in the way that children's voices go flat when they're repeating something that frightened them badly enough to memorize it word for word. "He said it would be my fault. He said I was clumsy and stupid, and nobody would believe me anyway." Devlin's knuckles went white on the steering wheel. Garrett held Chloe tighter. His jaw was clenched so hard his back teeth ached. "Chloe," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Listen to me very carefully. What Brett said is a lie, every single word of it. You are not stupid. You are not clumsy. And this is not your fault. What he did is wrong. And I promise you on everything I am, he will never touch you again." She was quiet for a moment. Then with the plain and devastating matter-of-factness that only a 5-year-old can manage, "My arm really hurts, Mr. Iron." "I know, little one, we're almost there." Before going any further, you need to understand how Garrett Malone came to be the man a 5-year-old girl called in the middle of the night. Garrett had grown up in Billings, the son of a long-haul trucker named Frank Malone, who drank Budweiser by the case and communicated primarily through the kind of silence that told you to stay out of his way, and occasionally through less silent methods. Frank Malone left on a Tuesday morning when Garrett was 10 years old and never came back. He left behind a boy who had already learned two things very clearly: that the world had no mercy for softness, and that the only currency worth having was the kind you could back up with your hands. Garrett Malone had spent the next 34 years being exactly the kind of man that lesson produces. He had joined the Hells Angels at 29 after a decade of doing the kinds of things that eventually either land you in prison or get you recruited by people who can use what you are. He had done both. He had a record assault, aggravated assault, a weapons charge that had been plea bargained down to something manageable. He was known in 3 counties as a man you did not want to be on the wrong side of, and in 1 county as a man you genuinely did not want to exist near. He had earned the name earned because in 15 years of club life, nobody had ever managed to put him on the ground and keep him there. None of which explained how a 5-year-old girl had ended up with his number on her mother's refrigerator. Nora Webb had moved in next door to Garrett's farmhouse 14 months ago, her daughter and 2 suitcases and a determination to start over in a town where nobody knew the shape of the story she was walking away from. She worked the dinner and closing shift at the Copperhead Diner in town, which meant she left at 4 in the afternoon and came home after midnight, which meant that Chloe spent her evenings with a rotating series of neighbors and babysitters, and increasingly the large tattooed leather-vested man next door who had fixed Chloe's bicycle in July without being asked and had never once raised his voice in her presence. Nora had come to him directly about it 3 months after she moved in. She stood on his porch in her diner uniform, her blonde hair pulled back, her eyes the particular careful eyes of a woman who has learned to assess men quickly and accurately and act on that assessment. She looked at his Hells Angels vest, his scarred hands, the tattoos running up his neck, and she said, "I know what people say about you. I know what that patch means. But Chloe talks about you like you hung the moon. She asks about you every day. And I've spent enough time being a bad judge of character that I've decided to try trusting someone else's judgment." A pause. Even if that someone is 5. Garrett had laughed, a real laugh which surprised him. He had said yes. Over the months that followed, Chloe Webb had worked her way into his life with the total and absolute effectiveness that only small children can manage, moving through the defenses of a man who had spent 30 years building them with the simple tactic of not acknowledging that defenses existed. She brought him drawings, his motorcycle, his barn himself, as a steg perm with enormous arms and the word iron written beneath in red crayon. She asked him approximately 4,000 questions. Why is your bike so loud? Why do all your friends wear the same jacket? Do horses like music? Can I honk the horn? Do you have a favorite color? Why does your face look like that when you're thinking? He taught her to feed the horses at the ranch down the road. He let her sit on his parked Harley and make engine sounds with her mouth. He fixed her bicycle. He read her a story once when Nora was running late and the babysitter had canceled, and somehow that one time had become a habit, and the habit had become something he didn't have a word for yet, but that he found himself thinking about on the long, quiet evenings alone. Chloe had named it The Brave Horse Story, a story he'd made up on the spot one night about a horse that was afraid of nothing and had adventures in the mountains, and she requested it approximately once a week and corrected him severely whenever he got the details wrong, which was often. He was by any reasonable assessment terrible at telling stories, but Chloe did not seem to require him to be good at it. She required him to be there. And somewhere along the way, Garrett Malone, who had not had anything resembling family in longer than he could clearly remember, had started showing up. When Brett Coulter came into Nora Webb's life 8 months ago, Garrett had registered it the way he registered most things, quietly, with his face still and his attention sharper than it appeared. Brett was 34, good-looking in the broad-shouldered American way, the kind of man who knew how to walk into a room and make it like him. He had a job in sales, a truck that cost more than Garrett's entire barn, and a quality that Garrett noticed immediately and chose not to say anything about because it was not his business. The quality was that Brett Coulter moved through Nora Webb's life with a speed and a certainty that made Garrett's instincts hum. But Nora was an adult woman making her own choices. Chloe seemed okay, seemed happy, talked about Brett the way she talked about television characters she had decided were funny. And Garrett was a neighbor, not family, not anything that gave him standing to say what his gut was saying. He had kept his mouth shut. He would not keep his mouth shut again. St. Catherine's emergency room in Harlow was quiet at midnight. A nurse at the desk, two people in plastic chairs waiting their turn. The fluorescent lights doing what fluorescent lights do at midnight, which is make everyone look slightly worse than they are. The nurse at the desk was a woman named Peggy Derrick, 50 years old, 22 years in emergency medicine, and possessed of the particular quick-reading ability that emergency nurses develop, which allows them to assess a situation in about 3 seconds and know what kind of night this is about to be. She looked at two large men in leather vests, one of them carrying a child. The child's left arm visibly wrong from across the room, the child's face pressed against the larger man's chest. Her expression moved through confusion, through assessment, through the professional concern of someone who has seen this particular combination of elements before and knows what it usually means. Then Chloe lifted her head, saw Peggy coming toward them, and said clearly, "Don't let him leave. He said he'd stay." Peggy looked at Garrett, at the way the child's good hand was gripping his vest, at the way the child had said it, not asking, not hoping, but stating. The certainty of a child who has identified the one safe thing in the room and is not letting go of it. "Are you family?" Peggy asked. "Neighbor. I'm the one she called." Garrett's voice was flat and level. "Her mother is on her way. She works nights." "What happened?" "Her mother's boyfriend. He grabbed her arm and twisted it." He met Peggy's eyes directly. "There's a handprint bruise on her cheek. His handprint." Peggy looked at Chloe's cheek, at the arm. Her expression did not change, not because she wasn't feeling anything, but because after 22 years, she had learned that feelings were for after. Right now, there was work to do. "Let's get her into an exam room," Peggy said. "You can come with her." "I'm not going anywhere," Garrett said. They took x-rays, spiral fracture of the left forearm, both bones, the radius and the ulna, fractured in the distinctive twisting pattern that told the medical story as clearly as any eyewitness account. Peggy explained it quietly to Garrett while a second nurse settled Chloe for casting, keeping her voice low and clinical, but watching his face the entire time to see what kind of man she was talking to. "A spiral fracture is what we see when a limb is twisted under applied force," she said. "It doesn't happen from falling off a bicycle. It doesn't happen from tumbling downstairs. It happens when someone takes hold of a small arm with both hands and wrenches it." She paused. "We're required to report this. Child Protective Services will be notified tonight." "Good," Garrett said. "The police will need a statement. From you, from Chloe, and from her mother when she arrives." "Good." Peggy studied him for a moment. This large man with scarred knuckles and a Hell's Angels patch on his chest, sitting in a plastic chair next to a child who had fallen asleep mid-sentence from exhaustion and pain, her casted arm propped on a pillow, her good hand still loosely holding the lapel of his vest even in sleep. "She's lucky to have someone who showed up for her," Peggy said. Garrett looked at Chloe sleeping. "She shouldn't need luck," he said. "She's 5 years old. She should just be safe." Nora Webb came through the emergency room doors at 12:41 in the morning. She was still in her Copperhead diner uniform, white shirt, black apron, her name tag reading Nora, still clipped to her chest. Her hair had come loose from its ponytail blonde strands across her face, and her mascara was already tracking down her cheeks from the crying she had been doing since Garrett's call reached her at work. She saw Chloe's arm in the cast. The sound she made was not a scream and not a cry. It was something deeper and older than either of those things the sound a person makes when something they would have died to prevent has happened anyway, and they are only now fully understanding the shape of what they were not able to stop. She crossed the room and went to her knees beside the bed and put her arms around her daughter's small body carefully on the good side. Baby, oh God, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. Chloe stirred, still half asleep. It's okay, Mommy. Mr. Iron came. He carried me. Nora looked up at Garrett. Her eyes were broken. Not wet broken, not crying broken, in the way that something breaks when the weight on it finally exceeds what it was built to carry. I didn't know, she said. Garrett, I swear to God, I didn't know he would do this. He was so good with her. He read her bedtime stories. He took her for ice cream every Friday. I thought her voice cracked clean through. I thought she finally had someone. I thought he was good. He fooled you, Garrett said. That's what men like him do. I should have known. A mother should stop. He kept his voice firm, not harsh, just firm. You didn't do this. Brett did this. And tearing yourself apart right now is not going to help Chloe. She needs you present. She needs you strong. You can fall apart later. Right now, she needs her mom. Something moved through Nora Webb's face, not recovery, not resolution, but the first recognition that recovery might eventually be possible. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She turned back to her daughter and smoothed her hair and kissed her forehead and said things that were only for the two of them, words Garrett couldn't hear and didn't try to. He stepped into the hallway. Devlin was waiting there, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, his face unreadable, in the way it got when he was processing something at a depth he hadn't finished reaching yet. He straightened when he saw Garrett and tipped his head toward the exit door at the end of the hall. They went outside. The Montana night was below freezing. Their breath hung in the air between them. I found out where he's staying, Devlin said. Garrett didn't say anything. Buddy of his named Watts has a place out past Route 9, about 20 minutes from here. The silence between them had a weight to it. Devlin could read Garrett's face like a map, 18 years of riding together, fighting together, bleeding together. And this was a face that Devlin knew every expression of, including this one. Don't, Devlin said. He broke her arm, Dev. She's 5 years old. I know. He put his hand on her face. I know, brother. She was alone in that closet in the dark, holding her broken arm. She called me because there was nobody else. I know. Devlin took a step forward. He put both hands on Garrett's shoulders, a grip not meant to restrain, meant to anchor. And if you ride out to that place tonight and do what you're thinking, which is beat Brett Coulter until he stops breathing, then what? You go to prison, maybe for life this time, given your record. And then who does Chloe call at midnight? Who carries her? Who promises her she's safe? Garrett shoved Devlin's hands off. He turned and put his fist through the brick wall of the hospital. Once. Twice. The skin of his knuckles split open. Blood ran down his fingers and dripped onto the frozen concrete below. Devlin watched without flinching. He had seen this before. Feel better, he said. No, it never does. Hitting things doesn't fix things, Garrett. It never has. We just told ourselves it did because it was the only language we knew. Garrett stood with his back to his friend, staring at the blood on his hand. His whole body was shaking. Not from cold. I can't let him walk, he said. The words came out rough ground down from something larger. I can't, not for this. I'm not asking you to let him walk. Devlin's voice had changed, something darker in it now, something that came from further back than tonight. I'm asking you to let him be destroyed by something stronger than your fists, something that can't be blocked or buried or paid off. A pause. There's a lawyer in Billings, Vivian Marsh. She takes cases like this: child abuse, domestic violence. She's gone up against coaches, teachers, county officials, men with money and connections, and every reason to believe they were untouchable. Another pause longer. She doesn't lose. Garrett turned around. How do you know about her? Devlin was quiet for the longest silence Garrett had ever heard from him. The generator on the side of the hospital hummed. Somewhere down the block, a dog was barking at something in the dark. Because she saved my life, Devlin said at last, when I was 7 years old. Garrett stared at him. 18 years. 18 years of riding together, sleeping in the same camps, watching each other's backs in situations where your back very much needed watching. And this man had never said a word. My stepfather, Devlin said. His voice was quiet and completely level, the flatness of a man who has spent a long time achieving peace with something and has finally found the moment to say it out loud. His name was Gerald. He used to put cigarettes out on my back, broke my collarbone twice. My mother was too afraid to leave. He stopped, started again. Vivian Marsh was the one who built the case. She put Gerald away for 12 years. She's the reason I'm standing here tonight, instead of having become something much worse. The parking lot was silent. Garrett looked at his oldest friend and saw him, maybe for the first time. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because I was ashamed. Devlin met his eyes, steady. Because the club teaches us that strength means never being the one who was hurt. Because I spent my whole adult life pretending that boy in the closet with cigarette burns on his back was someone else. He glanced back toward the emergency room windows. But when you told me about Chloe tonight, every bit of it came back. Everything that boy felt. And I know Garrett. I know exactly what that little girl is feeling right now and what she'll feel tomorrow and next month and 10 years from now if we don't do this right. The cold pressed in around them both. After a long moment, Garrett said, 24 hours. I'll give it 24 hours. That's all I'm asking. But if the law doesn't, it will. Dev, it will. Devlin said it with a certainty that came from somewhere deeper than optimism. Because this time, Vivian Marsh is going to know about it. And Sheriff Clint Coulter is not going to be able to bury it. Not with her watching. Garrett looked at the blood drying on his knuckles. The cold was numbing his hand. You said Clint Coulter. Brett's uncle. Sheriff of this county for 11 years. Devlin's jaw tightened. 2 women have tried to report Brett before. Both times Uncle Clint made the complaints disappear. No record, no investigation, nothing. That's why Vivian is the only option. She doesn't work through local channels. She goes straight to the state. 2 women. At least 2. Maybe more. This was not a man who had made a mistake on a bad night. This was a pattern, a practiced, protected pattern with a badge behind it and a family willing to spend money to keep it that way. Garrett felt something shift inside him. The rage was still there, enormous and burning, but it had found a new shape, not blind anymore. Pointed. Okay, he said. We call the lawyer. They went back inside. In Chloe's exam room, Nora had climbed up onto the narrow hospital bed beside her daughter and was lying with one arm draped carefully over Chloe's body, the 2 of them curled together in the small space. The cast on Chloe's arm was still drying. The bruise on her cheek had darkened to purple. Garrett stood in the doorway and looked at them. His phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number, Brett's number, different from the one he had been called from, but Garrett knew immediately. He read it. I know who you are, Iron. I know where you live. If Nora calls the cops, I'll make sure she loses that kid for good. My uncle runs this county. You're nothing. She's nothing. Try me. Garrett read it again. Read it a 3rd time. Then he turned and showed the screen to Devlin without a word. Devlin's jaw tightened until the muscle at the corner of it was visibly working. He stared at the words for a moment. "He's threatening a 5-year-old's mother," he said, "while the child is in the hospital with a broken arm," he put there. "Screenshot it," Garrett said. His voice had gone very quiet, the kind of quiet that people who knew him understood was more dangerous than anything louder. "Back it up. Cloud storage. Everything. Vivian Marsh is going to want to see every word." Devlin was already doing it. Garrett looked back at the doorway at Chloe asleep in the hospital bed, her casted arm on its pillow, her mother's arm across her ribs, two people who had trusted him, and one of them barely old enough to understand what trust was. He had made a promise to that little girl. Not with fury, not with fists, with something Brett Coulter had never expected from a man like Garrett Malone, patient strategy and the kind of strength that doesn't leave bruises. But the beast inside him was wide awake, and it was hungry. And 24 hours was a very long time. At 3 in the morning, with Chloe finally sleeping deeply and Nora dozing beside her, Garrett sat in the plastic chair next to the hospital bed and watched Chloe's chest rise and fall. Every time she shifted in her sleep and her casted arm moved wrong and she made a small sound, not quite a cry, not quite a whimper, something in between, it went through Garrett like a blade, finding a gap in armor he had thought was seamless. Devlin came back at 4 with gas station coffee. He handed a cup to Garrett without speaking and sat in the other chair. They sat in silence for a long time, the way men sit who have known each other long enough to not need words to fill the space between them. "I keep thinking about what she said," Garrett said finally, "that Brett told her it would be her fault, that nobody would believe her." "It's the playbook," Devlin said, "word for word. Same thing Gerald told me. You're lying, no one cares. If you talk, it gets worse." He looked at Chloe. "She's 5, and she already believes it. Kids believe the adults in their lives. That's what makes it so evil." "Yeah," Garrett said. The hospital settled around them. Down the hall, a monitor beeped steadily. Somewhere outside, the Montana night was turning slowly toward a gray and unwilling dawn. Garrett looked at his hands. The split knuckles from the wall had clotted and dried. Hands that had done damage he was not proud of, and some he did not regret, and a few things he would never fully account for. And hands that had carried a 5-year-old girl through a dark house at midnight as carefully as though she were the most fragile thing he had ever touched. He thought about his father, Frank Malone, driving west on a Tuesday morning and never stopping. He thought about the boy that 10-year-old had become and the long, specific road from there to here, and whether any of it had been inevitable, and whether the man sitting in this plastic chair at 4 in the morning was the end of that road or the beginning of a different one. Chloe shifted in her sleep. Her good hand found the edge of his jacket and held on. He let her hold it. At 7 in the morning, St. Catherine's discharged Chloe Webb with a fiberglass cast on her left forearm, a prescription for children's pain medication, a referral to a child psychologist, and a mandatory CPS notification already filed. Peggy Derrick pulled Garrett aside before they left. "The caseworker will be assigned within 48 hours, she said. "I want to be honest with you, the system is slow and overworked. Cases fall through the cracks." Garrett met her eyes. "This one won't." Peggy looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded, once the nod of a woman who believed him. Devlin drove them to the farmhouse. It was the only place Garrett could think of that was safe, set back from the road, no neighbors close enough to see who came or went, the kind of property that announced itself as a place where strangers did not drop by uninvited. He had a spare bedroom. Chloe had claimed it weeks ago during one of her visits, calling it the horse room because Garrett had hung a picture of a palomino on the wall after she asked him to a $5 print in a drugstore frame, the finest art he owned. Nora carried Chloe inside and put her to bed in the horse room. Chloe looked at the palomino picture and at the cast on her arm and at Garrett standing in the doorway. "Mr. Iron." "Yeah, little one. You won't let Brett come here, right?" "Nobody is coming here. Not ever." He said it the way you say things that are not promises so much as facts. This is the safest place in the world. Promise, promise. She looked at him for one more moment, the searching, trusting, utterly direct look of a child deciding whether an adult can be believed, and then she closed her eyes. Within a minute, she was asleep. The horse room was quiet except for her breathing. Garrett stood in the doorway and listened to it for a long time. Nora Webb sat down at Garrett's kitchen table at 8 in the morning and put her face in her hands. She had showered. She had changed into clothes Garrett had found in a donation box a church group had dropped at his property months ago, jeans that were slightly too large, a gray sweater that hung past her hips. She looked smaller in them, stripped of the diner uniform that was the costume of her daily life, and something about that smallness made her look more real than Garrett had ever seen her. She didn't cry. She was past crying. She just sat there with her face in her hands and her shoulders very still, like a house after the storm has passed through and taken everything that wasn't nailed down. Garrett set a cup of coffee in front of her and sat across the table. He waited. "I need to tell you something," she said without looking up, "and you're going to hate me for it." "You don't know that. I do." She lifted her face. Her eyes were dreary and devastated, the eyes of a woman in the middle of a reckoning she had been postponing and could not postpone any longer. This wasn't the first time. Garrett's grip on his coffee cup tightened. "3 weeks ago," Nora said. Her voice was flat, moving through the words with the deliberate steadiness of someone reciting something they have already rehearsed in their own head 100 times. "I came home from work and Chloe had a bruise on her upper arm. Brett said she fell off the porch step. Chloe said the same thing they both told me, the exact same story, the same words, almost like..." She stopped, started again. "I believed them. I wanted to believe them. Because if it wasn't true, if it wasn't an accident, then I had looked away from something I should have seen, and I couldn't face that." Garrett said nothing. "A month before that, Chloe was in the bath, and I saw a mark on her back. A grab mark, the kind that looks like fingers pressed hard into skin. Brett said she bumped into the kitchen counter. I said okay." Her jaw tightened. "I ran the bath water hotter, and I pretended I hadn't seen it." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the Montana morning was pale and cold, the sky the color of old iron, the kind of November sky that commits to nothing. "I knew," Nor said. The two words came out small and absolute. "Somewhere inside myself I knew. But I was so tired, Garrett. I've been tired for 3 years. Working doubles, not sleeping, doing it alone, completely alone. And Brett was there. He was present and he was kind to me. And I told myself the bruises were accidents because the alternative was that I had handed my daughter to a man who hurt her. And I couldn't..." Her voice finally broke. Not a sob, just a fracture. "I couldn't live with that. So I chose not to see it." She looked up at him. "So go ahead. Tell me I'm a terrible mother. Tell me I failed her. Because I did. I know I did." Garrett was quiet for a moment. Part of him was angry, a real genuine anger that lived in the place where Chloe's bruises lived, where the image of that handprint on her cheek lived. He would not pretend that wasn't there because it was. But a larger part of him understood something about survival that he had never had to read in a book, because he had lived it, the particular mathematics of exhaustion, of isolation of a person stretched so thin across so many obligations that their perception narrows to whatever gets them through the next shift, the next week, the next month. He understood what it meant to grab onto something that kept you afloat without asking what was underneath it. "You're not a terrible mother," he said. "You're a tired one. There's a difference." She shook her head. "There is," he said. "You worked double shifts for 3 years to keep a roof over her head. You loved her every single day. And when the truth couldn't be pushed away anymore, when it got loud enough that it couldn't be ignored, your daughter knew exactly who to call." He paused. "She didn't call Brett. She didn't call 911. She called me because you put my number on that refrigerator. Because some part of you, even when the rest of you was too tired to look clearly, was already planning for this. Some part of you was already protecting her. Nora stared at him for a long moment. Then she put her head down on the table and let everything that had been holding itself back come out at once, not crying so much as finally releasing the pressure that had been building since the moment she'd gotten Garrett's call at the diner, since she had walked through those emergency room doors and seen her daughter's arm, since she had understood the full weight of what had been happening in her own house while she was 3 miles away pouring coffee for strangers. Garrett sat with her. He did not touch her. He did not try to fix it or move it along or tell her it was going to be okay, because some things are not okay, and pretending otherwise is its own kind of injury. He just stayed, present and still and not going anywhere. That in the end was what she needed most. Devlin called Vivienne Marsh at 8:30. He put the phone on speaker and set it on Garrett's kitchen table so Garrett could hear. Nora had gone to sit with Chloe. The kitchen was quiet except for the coffee maker finishing its cycle and the distant sound of a horse moving in the barn. The phone rang twice. Devlin Cole. A woman's voice, warm but braced with something underneath the warmth like a hand in a velvet glove. It's been a long time. How are you? I'm all right, Vivian, but I'm not calling about me. I need your help. He told her everything. Garrett listened as Devlin laid it out in order. No embellishment, no editorializing. Chloe, the broken arm, the handprint bruise, Brett Coulter, the threatening text message, Sheriff Clint Coulter, the 2 previous reports that had been swallowed by the system. Vivian did not interrupt. There was only the occasional quiet sound of someone taking careful notes. When Devlin finished, the line was silent for a moment. The child is 5 years old, Vivian said. Yes, ma'am. And the sheriff of this county is the abuser's uncle, who has previously buried at least 2 complaints. That's what we know of. There could be more. How is she right now? Sleeping. She's at my friend Garrett's place. He's the one she called. A pause. Your friend also, Hell's Angels. Yes, ma'am. Garrett braced himself for the hesitation, for the polite recalibration, the we'll see the conflict of interest. He had encountered that hesitation his entire adult life, the moment when people who might otherwise help looked at the patch on his vest and decided the math didn't work for them. I'll be there by noon, Vivienne Marsh said. Don't let anyone speak to local law enforcement until I arrive. Don't respond to any further messages from Brett Coulter. Don't contact the sheriff's office under any circumstances. A brief pause. And for the love of God, please make sure your friend doesn't do anything with his hands that a lawyer can undo. Yes, ma'am. Devlin. Yeah, it's good to hear your voice. I think about how you're doing more than you probably know. Devlin's composure cracked for just a fraction of a second, a blink, a slight tightening around the eyes that was gone almost before it appeared. Thank you, Vivian, for then. And for now. He hung up and looked at Garrett. She's coming. I heard. Can you hold it together until noon? Garrett looked out the kitchen window at the barn, at the gray November sky above it. I'll hold it together. He held it together until 10:15. That was when his phone buzzed again. A new text from a number he didn't recognize, different from the previous one, but the language was unmistakable. Brett Coulter had switched phones. Careful enough to change numbers, not careful enough to stay quiet. The message had a photo attached. Garrett opened it. The photo showed Nora's house, taken from the street from a car window by the angle of it, sometime in the last few hours, because the porch light she had left on Thursday night was still burning in the image. In the foreground, slightly blurred the edge of a truck door. The message beneath the photo read, I know she's not home. I know where you live too, Iron. Cute little farm. Lot of dry wood out there. Be a shame. Garrett read it twice. He was threatening to burn down the farmhouse, with Chloe inside. He showed the phone to Devlin without speaking. Devlin read it. His face went white, then a dark and settled red. He set the phone down on the table very carefully, the way you set something down when the alternative is throwing it through a window. He's escalating, Devlin said. This isn't just an abuser anymore. This is a cornered animal. I need to go find him. No, Devlin's voice was absolutely flat. You need to forward this to Vivian immediately. Garrett, listen to me. He is building your case for you. Every message he sends, every photo, every threat, it's another count on the indictment. He's arrogant enough to think he's untouchable because his uncle has a badge. He doesn't understand that his uncle's protection has limits and he just blew past them. Devlin picked up the phone and began the process of documenting everything: screenshots, backups, a forwarded message to Vivian Marsh's number. Let him keep talking. Every word out of his mouth is a nail in his coffin. You just have to let him keep swinging the hammer. Garrett's hands were shaking. The rage was a living thing inside him, pressing against his ribs from the inside, and he was aware in a very specific and clinical way that he was closer to the edge than he had been in years, closer than was safe for anyone, including himself. What if he's not bluffing? Garrett said. What if he actually comes here? Then we call state police, not the sheriff, and we let the cameras do what cameras do. Devlin pointed to the two security cameras mounted on Garrett's porch installed years ago for reasons that had nothing to do with child safety and everything to do with the practical realities of being the kind of man Garrett was. He comes within 100 yards of this house, we have him on video. He comes with a gas can, he goes to prison for attempted murder of a child, and even Clint Coulter can't make that disappear. Garrett hated this. Every cell in his body hated this. The waiting, the planning, the deliberate channeling of what he felt into something careful and strategic rather than immediate and physical. He was a man who had spent his entire adult life solving problems with speed and force, and the idea of sitting in his kitchen managing his own reactions while a man who had broken a child's arm was out there sending photographs felt like swallowing something that was burning him on the way down. But Chloe was asleep in the next room, and Chloe trusted him. Not Iron, not the Beast. Him, Garrett, the man who read her the brave horse story and got the details wrong and let her correct him because her voice when she said he was doing it wrong was the best sound he had heard in years. "Okay," Garrett said. "We wait for Vivian." Vivian Marsh arrived at 12:15. She was not what Garrett had imagined, and he had imagined a specific type, the sharp-edged professional woman in a power suit briefcase attitude to match. He had assembled this image from television and from the 2 or 3 lawyers he had encountered across a table from him in courtrooms, all of whom had been men in good suits, who had looked at him like he was a problem to be minimized. The woman who knocked on his front door was 63 years old. She wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck and a wool coat that had been expensive once and had since graduated to simply being good. Her silver hair was cut short and practical. She carried a worn leather bag that looked as though it had been places and remembered all of them. But her eyes were something else entirely. They moved across Garrett's kitchen in 3 seconds and assembled everything in it: the 2 men, the woman at the table, the half-drunk cups of coffee, the tension that had been living in the room since Thursday night, into a complete picture. She had the eyes of someone who had spent 40 years in rooms where people were not telling the whole truth and had developed the inability to see through the parts they were leaving out. She crossed to Garrett and shook his hand. Her grip was stronger than men 20 years her junior. "You must be Garrett." "Yes, ma'am." "Devlin tells me you've shown considerable restraint. Given what I know of your history, I find that genuinely impressive." "Don't be impressed yet. The day is not over." She almost smiled. Then she turned to Nora and something shifted in her manner, not softer exactly, but differently calibrated. The precision of a person who knows that different situations require different instruments. "Mrs. Webb, I'm Vivian Marsh. I'm going to help you, and I'm going to be very direct with you because that is the only way I know how to work." She sat down at the kitchen table and opened her bag, legal pads folders, a small recorder. "Tell me everything, from the beginning. When you met Brett Coulter, what attracted you to him the first moment anything felt wrong, every incident you can remember. Don't edit, don't minimize, don't protect him, and don't protect yourself. I need the complete truth or I cannot do my job. Nora looked at her for a moment. Then she took a breath and started talking. The account took an hour. Vivian did not interrupt once. She wrote steadily, asked Nora to repeat specific details, dates, exact words, the precise locations of marks on Chloe's body, the exact phrases Brett had used when he explained them away. When Nora finished, Vivian was quiet for a full minute, reviewing her notes with the concentration of someone checking a structure for load-bearing flaws. How long had Brett been in your life before the first incident? She asked. About 4 months, maybe 4.5. And you described him initially as immediately warm with Chloe, attentive, reliable. He was wonderful with her. At first, Nora's voice had gone flat again. He noticed things, what she liked, what made her laugh. He remembered. He seemed genuinely. She stopped. What you're describing is called grooming, Vivian said. Not only of the child, of you. Men like Brett Coulter don't choose victims at random. They identify single mothers, women who are exhausted, isolated, stretched thin, doing everything alone. They present themselves as the missing piece, the helper, the partner, the father figure. They make themselves essential. They establish trust. They create dependency. And then once they are embedded, once you need them, and your child has accepted them, and your life has reorganized itself around their presence, the mask begins to come off. Nora closed her eyes. I feel so stupid, she said. You're not stupid. You're a target. Vivian's voice was not unkind, but it did not soften the word. There is a meaningful difference. Recognizing the difference matters both for your own recovery and for your daughter's. She turned to Garrett and Devlin. Show me the messages. They showed her both texts, the first one from Thursday night, the second with the photograph of Nora's house and the arson threat. Vivian read them slowly, her expression still, her pen moving steadily across her legal pad. Then she set the pad down and looked up. Garrett had seen that look in one other place. His own mirror, sometimes at the end of a night when things had gone a particular way. Rage, not the hot, explosive kind, but the cold, contained kind that has been compressed into something harder and more deliberate than anger usually gets to be. He has just committed witness intimidation, Vivian said quietly, and made explicit threats against a minor's place of residence. Those are felonies that exist entirely outside the jurisdiction of Clint Coulter's badge. She closed her notepad. He's finished. He simply doesn't know it yet. His uncle, Nora started, is a problem, not an insurmountable one. Vivian's voice was measured and absolute. I've dealt with corrupt law enforcement before. We bypass the sheriff's office entirely, state police, state prosecutor, federal channels if necessary. The text messages alone constitute federal witness tampering. Uncle Clint cannot wave that away. She stood straightening her coat. There's one more thing. Devlin mentioned Brett may have prior victims, at least 2 women. At least 2 that we know of, Devlin said. I'll find them. When I do, this becomes a pattern case. One victim, a skilled defense attorney, can argue aberration, impulse, isolated incident. 3 victims across multiple years. She picked up her bag. A jury sees a predator. She moved toward the door, then turned back. I need 48 hours to build this properly. During that time, no contact with the Brett Coulter, no contact with the sheriff's office. No one goes anywhere near wherever Brett is currently staying. She looked at each of them in turn. When her eyes landed on Garrett, they stayed there a moment longer. Can you agree to that? Devlin nodded immediately. Nora nodded. Everyone looked at Garrett. The beast was not quiet. It was never quiet now. It moved continuously in the space behind his ribs, awake and hungry, and deeply aware of the fact that a man who had broken a child's arm was breathing free Montana air somewhere 20 minutes away. 48 hours. He held Vivian Marsh's gaze. 48 hours, he said. She nodded once with the gravity of someone accepting a thing they know the weight of. Then she left. Garrett drove to Billings Monday morning. The address Devlin had given him was a professional building near the university, clean, anonymous, the kind of place designed to not announce what happened inside it. Dr. Owen Strand, the sign beside the door read, Individual and Group Therapy, Veterans First Responders and High-Stress Occupational Clients. Garrett sat in the parking lot for 15 minutes. He watched two other people go in. He watched one come out. He thought about leaving 4 separate times and did not leave. Then he got out of the truck and went inside. The waiting room was ordinary chairs, a small table with magazines, a window that looked out at a parking lot, a young woman at a desk, the ordinary infrastructure of a place where people came to put words to things they had been carrying without language. Dr. Owen Strand came out to meet him himself. He was 50-something, lean, with the kind of face that had looked at difficult things for a long time and had arrived at equanimity through experience rather than temperament. He wore no tie. He looked at Garrett without the assessment Garrett was accustomed to, not avoiding the patch and the scars and the general physical fact of him, but not making them the point either, just looking at the man in front of him. "Come on in," he said. The office was plain. 2 chairs at an angle to each other, a window, a small bookshelf. No couch. Garrett was faintly grateful for the absence of a couch. He sat down. "Tell me why you're here," Strand said. "My friend made me come." "Is that the only reason?" Garrett looked at the bookshelf, at the window, at his own hands, knuckles still scabbed from the hospital wall. "No, there's a little girl. She's 5 years old. Someone broke her arm, and I want to find the man who did it and hurt him badly enough that he never does it again. And I'm afraid that if I don't talk to someone, I'm actually going to do it." Strand did not write anything down. He did not reach for a notepad. He just sat with what Garrett had said, giving it the space to be exactly what it was. "Tell me about the anger," Strand said. "Not the event, the anger itself. When did it start?" "It didn't start with this." "I know. When did it start?" Garrett was quiet for a long time. "I was 12, he said at last. "Kid at school said something about my mother. I broke his nose." He paused. "How did it feel?" Strand had not asked that question, but Garrett found he was answering it anyway. "It felt like the first time I was ever powerful. My father had left 2 years before. My mother she wasn't doing well. I was small and angry and scared all the time. And when I hit that kid and he went down, the fear stopped. Just for a second, but that second was enough." He stopped. "And I've been chasing it ever since." Strand was quiet for a moment. Then, "The problem with violence as a coping mechanism is that it works. That's what makes it so difficult to give up. It genuinely stops the fear in the short term, but the relief gets shorter each time, and the action required to produce it has to get larger, until eventually the violence becomes your identity and you can't separate who you are from what you do, and you've forgotten who you were before it." Garrett looked at him. "Iron," he said. "That's who I became." "And who were you before Iron?" A long silence. Outside, a car passed in the parking lot. A scared kid who missed his father and didn't know what to do with that. Strand let the silence hold, did not fill it. After a while, Garrett said, "She called me Garrett the other day. The little girl. Not Mr. Iron, just Garrett. First time she's used my actual name." "How did that feel? Like being seen? Like she looked past the whole—" He gestured vaguely at himself. "All of this. And found the person underneath." "Maybe," Strand said, "that's the person worth protecting." Garrett drove back to the farmhouse carrying those words, in the particular rawness of a man who has said things out loud that have lived only in his chest for 40 years. On Saturday morning, the state police moved. They had been building quietly since Thursday night, the medical examiner's report, Peggy Derrick's testimony, the text messages Vivian had forwarded to the state prosecutor's office, the spiral fracture x-rays that required no interpretation beyond what they were. The case for arrest did not pass through the Harlow County Sheriff's Office at any point. That was deliberate, coordinated between Vivian and the state prosecutor, And it was the specific decision that Sheriff Clint Coulter would later say he never saw coming. He should have. Brett Coulter was arrested at Watts's trailer on Route 9 at 7:15 Saturday morning by two state police officers who did not ask for the county sheriff's involvement and did not receive it. He was processed, arraigned, and bail was set at an amount that made it clear the state prosecutor understood exactly what kind of case this was. 3 hours after the arraignment, Alderman Stuart Coulter, Brett's father, had a bail bondsman at the courthouse. He put up his family property as collateral. Brett walked out of county lockup by mid-afternoon. Vivian called Garrett with the news. "He's out," she said. Her voice was different, controlled in the way that meant she was containing something large. "His father paid it. Brett walked out 2 hours ago." Garrett felt the words land in his chest like stones dropped into still water. "There's a restraining order," Vivian continued, "200 feet from Chloe, from Nora, and from your property. If he violates it, he goes back in with no possibility of bail." "A restraining order is a piece of paper, Vivian. I know what a restraining order is. I also know that Brett Coulter is arrogant, impulsive, and congenitally incapable of following rules that inconvenience him. He will violate it. Men like him always do." A pause. "And when he does, we will be ready." The call ended. Garrett set down the book about emotional regulation he had been reading on the porch Strand's suggestion. Chapter 3, the half he understood, and looked out at the paddock where Chloe had spent the morning in slow circles on Devlin's old mare. Devlin had brought the horse over on Saturday as a surprise, a gentle rescue animal from a shelter in Bozeman. Chloe had named her Brave within 30 seconds of meeting her with the confident certainty of a child who understands immediately what something should be called. Chloe was inside now with Nora, the afternoon quiet. Garrett was still sitting on the porch at 2:47 when the black truck appeared on the road. He saw it from a quarter-mile away, the way you see things you have been expecting, in the specific, focused manner of a man who has been trained by long experience to identify threats before they arrive. He knew the truck. He knew the way it drove, too fast, too heavy, the aggressive road-eating quality of a man who believes that his right-of-way is absolute. Brett Coulter. Garrett stood up slowly. His heart rate went from resting to something else in the space of 2 seconds. Every muscle in his body coiled with the particular readiness that is not quite decision and not quite instinct, but exists in the space between them. "Chloe," he called toward the house. His voice was level, steady, a voice that gave nothing away because everything about this moment required that nothing be given away. "Come inside, please." "But I'm reading." "Now, Chloe." She appeared at the screen door, looked at his face, came immediately, the book still in her hand, her eyes moving past him to the road in the way that children's eyes move when they have learned to read the body language of adults who are afraid. "Is it Brett? Go to the horse room, close the door, don't come out until I tell you." She held his gaze for one moment, then she went inside. He heard her footsteps on the stairs, steady and quick, a child doing exactly what she had been told, because she understood at 5 years old with the devastating competence of a child who has learned too early what danger sounds like, that this was a moment for listening. The truck came up the gravel drive and stopped 30 feet from the porch. Brett Coulter got out. He was 34, broad-shouldered, the kind of good-looking that photographs well and wears quickly in person once you know what you're looking at. He moved with the ease of a man who has never had reason to doubt that spaces would accommodate him, that people would step aside, that the rules that governed other people's behavior did not apply to him with quite the same force. He stopped at the foot of the porch steps and looked up at Garrett. "I want to see Nora." "She's not here." Brett looked at the house. Something moved in his eyes, the calculating assessment of a man reading a situation looking for the angle. "Her car's in the drive." "She's not here," Garrett said again. The same tone, the same stillness. Brett's jaw worked. Then something shifted in his expression, the calculation replaced by something that had been underneath it all along. The thing that had grabbed a 5-year-old girl's arm with both hands. "You're nobody, you know that. You're a convicted felon with a biker patch in a God complex." You think you can take something that's mine. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Held it up, camera facing forward. Recording. Go ahead, Iron. Hit me. Right now on camera. Show everyone who the real danger is. The beast inside Garrett was not quiet. It had not been quiet since Thursday night, and it was not quiet now. It was fully enormously awake, pressing against the inside of his chest with all its weight, and every scar on his knuckles was burning, and he could see it with perfect clarity. One step forward, one motion, the specific satisfying physics of it. Then from inside the house, small and clear, through the screen door, a child's voice. Don't be scared, Mr. Iron. Brave people get scared too. They just don't let the scared part win. His own words, coming back to him through a 5-year-old girl's voice. Words he had said to her on Friday night when she had asked him if the hospital was going to hurt, spoken now. Without Chloe knowing what she was doing or why spoken, because she had heard them and kept them and pulled them out when she needed them herself. Garrett unclenched his fists. He took one step back. Brett blinked. The calculation in his eyes reassembled itself into something that was trying to look like confidence and wasn't quite making it. I'm not going to hit you, Brett. Garrett's voice was quiet, almost conversational. I'm not going to give you what you came here for. I'm not going to be the story you need me to be. He held Brett's gaze. Here's what is going to happen. You're going to get in your truck. You're going to drive away. And at your trial, 3 women are going to sit in that witness box and tell the court exactly what you are. Your father's money won't help you. Your uncle's badge won't help you. The truth is out. And the truth does not care how charming you are or whose name is on your family's property deed. Brett's hand holding the phone had developed a slight tremor. The composure was cracking, not dramatically, not all at once, but in the small, specific ways that composure cracks. When a man who has always relied on other people being afraid of him encounters someone who is not. The mask was slipping piece by careful piece, and what was showing beneath it was not power. It was a frightened man discovering that the things he had always counted on to protect him had stopped working. You'll regret this, Brett said. His voice had changed. The authority had gone out of it. It was the statement of a man who is no longer certain of what he's saying, but has to say something. No, Garrett said, I won't. I've done things in my life I regret, real things, things I carry. He looked at Brett steadily. Standing here right now, not hitting you, this is not going to be one of them. Brett stared at him for a long moment that was really several moments compressed together. Then he got in his truck. He backed out of the drive too fast, the wheels spitting gravel, and drove away down the road going too quickly for a man who was not running. Garrett watched until the truck disappeared around the bend. Then his legs gave out. He sat down on the porch steps and put his face in his hands. Everything hit him at once, the rage, the restraint, the terror of the moment, the relief that the moment was over, the shaking in his hands and the burning behind his eyes, and all the things that had been compressed into the last 5 days with nowhere to go. The screen door opened. Chloe came out. She sat down on the step beside him close enough that her shoulder touched his arm. She was holding her book in her lap. The barn cat had followed her out and arranged itself across her feet. He's gone, she asked. He's gone. You didn't hit him? No. And she considered this with the serious attentiveness she brought to things that mattered, even though you wanted to. Even though. Another silence. She leaned against his arm, the familiar warm weight of her, the simple absolute trust of a child who has decided you are safe and acts on that decision completely and without reservation. That's because you're the good kind of strong Mr. Iron, she said. The kind that doesn't have to hurt people to be brave. Garrett Malone sat on the porch steps in the cold Montana afternoon and felt something move through him that he had no name for yet. It was not the satisfaction of a fight won. It was not the relief of a threat neutralized. It was something quieter and deeper than either of those things, something that lived in a part of him that the beast had never had access to. He put his arm around Chloe. For the first time in his adult life in the presence of another human being, he let his eyes fill. They were not tears of rage. They were not tears of frustration. They were something he couldn't have named in the moment, though Devlin would tell him later, when Garrett tried to describe it, that the word he was looking for was grace. 2 hours later, Garrett's phone rang. "Vivian, the restraining order violation was captured on your porch cameras," she said. "Clear video, clear audio. And Brett's own phone was recording everything he said is now evidence. His admission that he grabbed Chloe too hard is on his own recording." A pause and then something in her voice that was not quite satisfaction, but was close to it. "Bail has been revoked. He's back in custody, and this time he is not getting out." Garrett looked across the room. Chloe was asleep on the couch. The barn cat was curled at her feet. Her cast was covered in stickers that Dr. Ruth Albright had brought during their session that morning, flowers and stars, and one small horse that Chloe had pointed to and said looked like Brave. Her face, for the first time since Thursday night, was completely still. Not the stillness of a child holding herself together in a dark closet. The stillness of a child who was for this moment at least simply asleep. The beast inside Garrett Malone was still there. He could feel it. He suspected he would feel it for the rest of his life. That was simply the shape of who he was. The architecture that his childhood and his choices and his long specific history had built. It was not going anywhere. But for the first time, he had put it to rest without feeding it. And the silence it left behind was the most powerful thing he had ever felt. Brett Coulter sat in county lockup while his father, Alderman Stuart Coulter, worked the phones. Stuart was a man who had spent 22 years in local politics, building the particular kind of capital that exists in small Montana communities. Favors owed relationships, cultivated the accumulated weight of a family name that had been present in this county long enough to feel like part of the landscape. He hired Crawford Hale within 48 hours of Brett's arrest. Crawford Hale was the kind of criminal defense attorney who got results for clients with money and whose results had nothing to do with innocence and everything to do with resources. $3,000 suits. An unbroken record in cases where the client could afford what it cost to break records. He filed an emergency motion for release, arguing that Brett posed no flight risk, that the restraining order violation had been a misunderstanding between neighbors, and that the evidence of child abuse was circumstantial and contested. Vivian Marsh was waiting for him. She stood before Judge Patricia Weston, a circuit judge from the state level, not the county, because Sheriff Clint Coulter had been formally recused from any proceeding touching this case the moment the state attorney general's office had opened its inquiry, and she presented the evidence in the clean, unhurried manner of a woman who has done this long enough to know that facts properly arranged do not need decoration. The medical examiner's report on Chloe's fracture, the text messages, the photograph of Nora's house, the security camera footage of Brett at Garrett's property standing 30 feet from a child he had been ordered by the court to stay away from, and the recording from Brett's own phone, Brett's voice, Brett's words captured on the device Brett had been holding when he thought he was building a case against someone else. Crawford Hale objected to nearly everything. Vivian overruled him with facts each time. Not with argument, not with theater, with facts presented one after another in the patient, inexorable way that water moves through stone. Judge Weston denied the motion. Brett Coulter stayed in county lockup. Bail was permanently revoked. Trial was set for 8 weeks out. Vivian called Garrett with the news on a Wednesday afternoon. He was in the barn with Chloe, who was engaged in a serious and largely one-sided conversation with Brave about the importance of standing still during grooming. The old mare was tolerating this with the philosophical resignation of an animal who has made peace with her circumstances. "He's staying locked up," Vivian said. "No bail, no release. He sits in that cell until the trial date." Garrett closed his eyes. Something loosened in his chest, a tightness that had been there since Thursday night, since the moment he had heard Chloe's voice on the phone, a constriction so constant he had stopped noticing it was there until it began fractionally to ease. Stuart Coulter has spent considerable money on Crawford Hale, Vivian continued. He has made calls to every political contact he has accumulated in 22 years of local office. But here is what powerful men consistently fail to understand. Until it is too late, their power exists in the dark. The moment a light is on them, it dissolves. A pause. Sheriff Clint Coulter has been suspended pending the state attorney general's investigation. His records have been subpoenaed. Every complaint he buried, every report he caused to disappear, every phone call he made to protect his nephew, it is all being examined. Both of them, Garrett said. Both of them. He looked at Chloe, who had given up on the grooming conversation and was now attempting to teach Brave to lift her front left hoof on command. The mare was not cooperating. Chloe was explaining the procedure again very slowly, as though the problem were comprehension rather than willingness. Vivian, Garrett said, I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me. Thank Nora. She's the one who decided to fight. She sat in that witness chair in my office and told me the truth about everything, including the things that made her look terrible. That took more courage than anything I have ever done in a courtroom. A brief pause. And Garrett, yeah, tell Devlin I'm glad he called. Garrett hung up. Chloe looked over at him from the other side of Brave's neck. She had the particular radar that children develop, the ability to sense when the emotional weather in a room has shifted, even when no one has said anything about it. Good news, she asked. The best kind. She considered this. Ice cream, good. Better than ice cream. She shook her head with the serene certainty of a 5-year-old who has not yet encountered anything better than ice cream. Nothing's better than ice cream, Mr. Iron. He laughed, a real laugh from somewhere deep in the chest, from a place he had genuinely not been certain still existed. You might be right about that, he said. 3 weeks after Brett Coulter's bail was revoked, Vivian Marsh found the other women. She called on a Tuesday morning while Garrett was drinking coffee on the porch, and Chloe was inside helping Nora pack carefully with great ceremony, wrapping her crayons one by one in paper towels before placing them in a box. Tess Grover, Vivian said, 28 years old. She dated Brett for 14 months 3 years ago. He choked her during an argument, his hands around her throat from behind without warning. She went to the Harlow Police Department the following morning to file a report. Sheriff Clint Coulter took her statement personally. He told her he would handle it, that she should go home and not worry. She never heard another word. The report vanished from the system entirely. Garrett said nothing. Laurel Finch, 31 years old. She met Brett in Bozeman before he moved to Harlow. He pushed her down a flight of stairs because she smiled at a waiter at a restaurant. She obtained a restraining order. Brett violated it twice. Nothing happened either time. She moved to Oregon to put distance between herself and him. And now, Tess broke down when I reached her. She said she had been waiting 3 years for someone to believe her. She said she had stopped telling people about it because the response was always the same. The sheriff had looked into it. There wasn't enough evidence Brett Coulter came from a good family. Vivian's voice was steady and controlled, but underneath the control was something that had been burning for a long time. Laurel said she would drive from Oregon if it meant Brett would finally be held accountable. She said she had been looking over her shoulder for 2 years. 3 women, Garrett said, spanning almost a decade. At minimum, there may be others who never reported at all. A pause. There is one more thing. I subpoenaed Brett's phone records. In the 6 months preceding Chloe's injury, Brett made 47 calls to Sheriff Clint Coulter's personal cell phone. 47? That is not a nephew maintaining family contact. That is coordination, systematic coordination between an abuser and a law enforcement officer to ensure that the abuser faced no consequences for his behavior. Her voice did not rise. It didn't need to. I have referred the full extent of Sheriff Coulter's involvement to the State Attorney General's office. Clint Coulter is not simply under investigation for the disappearance of Tess Grover's complaint. He is under investigation for a pattern of conduct spanning years. Nora had come to the kitchen doorway. She had heard enough to understand the shape of what was being said. Her hand went to the door frame, steadying herself. Nora sat down at the table. Garrett set the phone to speaker. "He told me no one would believe me," Nora said. Her voice was quiet. "Brett said that to me too after the first bruise. He said my uncle runs this county. He said it the way people say things they have said before and have been proven right about." "His uncle ran this county," Vivian said. Deliberate past tense. "I want you to hear that difference, Nora. Past tense. By the time I am finished, Clint Coulter will not be able to run so much as a church raffle." After the call ended, the kitchen was quiet for a long moment. Something had shifted in the house, not dramatically, not all at once, but in the slow and specific way that things shift when the thing you have been most afraid of begins to look smaller than the thing you are becoming. The fear did not disappear. Nora still checked the locks, still flinched at headlights moving across the ceiling at night, still woke at 3 in the morning with her heart going too fast for the silence around her. But underneath the fear, something harder was growing. The particular resolve that comes not from certainty that everything will be fine, but from the decision that you are done being smaller than the thing that frightened you. The three women met for the first time at Vivian Marsh's office in Billings on a Thursday afternoon. Garrett drove Nora. Devlin followed in his truck. They sat in the waiting room while Vivian took the women through separate preliminary conversations, and then Vivian opened the door to the conference room, and the three of them, Nora Webb, Tess Grover, and Laurel Finch, were in the same room for the first time. Three women who had never met. Three women connected by the same man, the same patterns, the same practice vocabulary of control and blame, the same uncle's badge that had made them feel like their own experiences were not real. Garrett did not hear what was said in that room. He sat in the waiting area with Devlin and drank bad coffee from a machine in the corner and watched the closed door. 40 minutes later, Vivian came out. She looked at Garrett and Devlin with the expression of a woman who has seen a great many things in 40 years of this work and is not often surprised by what people are capable of for good or ill. But there was something in her face that was not quite professional. Composure, something that lived around the eyes. "They're gonna be all right," she said. "All three of them." Devlin looked at her. "What happened in there?" The three of them just did something that most people never manage. She sat down in the chair across from them, straightened her notepad on her knee. They stopped being ashamed of what happened to them and started being angry about it. Together. A pause. That's when things change. That's always when things change. Garrett thought about Devlin in the hospital parking lot weeks ago, saying things that had been stored inside him for 18 years. He thought about himself in Owen Strand's office, saying things he had never said to anyone. He thought about the particular terrifying relief of being seen clearly and not destroyed by it. "Yeah," he said, "that's when things change." The trial began on a Tuesday. 8 weeks had passed since Chloe's arm. The cast was off. The bone had healed clean the way children's bones heal, with the indifferent biological efficiency of a body that does not know it is supposed to be damaged. Dr. Ruth Albright had been seeing Chloe twice a week, sitting on the floor of Garrett's horse room with a large box of crayons and an unhurried manner, and she had told Garrett after the most recent session that Chloe was doing something remarkable. "She's processing it," Albright said. "Not perfectly, not without difficulty. She still startles at certain sounds. She still watches the door when strangers are present. Those things will take time, but she is integrating the experience rather than sealing it off. She has language for what happened to her, and she has a stable foundation of safe relationships to stand on while she does the work." She looked at Garrett. "She talks about you constantly, not iron, Garrett." He drove to the courthouse with Devlin. Nora and Tess and Laurel were already inside, with Vivian having arrived separately. The courthouse in Harlow was a brick building from 1934 with high ceilings and wooden benches worn smooth by decades of people sitting in them, waiting for outcomes. Judge Patricia Weston was already on the bench when Garrett and Devlin took their seats in the gallery. She was a compact woman in her late 50s, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and the manner of someone who has presided over enough human difficulty to have arrived at a comprehensive lack of patience for nonsense. Crawford Hale sat at the defense table in his suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, arranging his papers with the careful, unhurried movements of a man performing confidence for the jury. Brett Coulter sat beside him. He looked smaller than he had in Garrett's driveway. The weeks in county lockup had done something to the performance of ease. He had always carried. It was still there, but it required visible effort now. And effort was not the same thing as ease. Vivian Marsh sat at the prosecution's table in her wool coat, her reading glasses on their chain, her worn leather bag open beside her. She was reviewing a document. She did not look up when Crawford Hale made a show of acknowledging her across the room. She was not there to perform. The medical examiner testified first. She was a precise woman who used words carefully and explained the spiral fracture with the calm specificity of someone who has learned that juries understand things better when they are not talked down to. A spiral fracture, she explained, occurred when a limb was subjected to torsional force, a twisting load applied from outside the body. It was not the fracture pattern produced by falls, by collisions, by the ordinary physical accidents of childhood. It is the fracture pattern produced, she said, when someone takes hold of a small limb with both hands and applies rotational force. It is, in my professional experience, one of the clearest indicators of deliberate inflicted injury in pediatric cases. Crawford Hale cross-examined. He suggested alternative mechanisms. The examiner addressed each one with the same patient precision. She had been doing this for 19 years. She had answered these questions before. Then Vivian introduced the recorded interview. Dr. Ruth Albright had conducted the interview 6 days after Chloe's injury in the horse room at Garrett's farmhouse, sitting on the floor with a box of crayons between them. The methodology was established in specific design to allow a child to describe their experience without leading questions, without adult framing, without the inadvertent suggestion of a particular narrative. The bailiff dimmed the lights. The jury watched a small girl with a cast on her arm sit across from a quiet woman on a bedroom floor and answer questions in the plain, unadorned language of a 5-year-old who is telling the truth because she does not know how to tell it any other way. She described Brett getting angry. She described the juice on the carpet. She described saying sorry twice. Then she described what he did. He grabbed my arm, Chloe's voice said from the courtroom speakers. Clear, small, absolutely certain. Both hands, and he twisted it like this. A pause during which on the screen she demonstrated the motion with her good hand. And I heard it crack, like a stick breaking. And then it hurt so bad I screamed and he let go. The courtroom was completely silent. 3 jurors were visibly crying. A 4th had her hand over her mouth. Crawford Hale looked at the table in front of him. Even Brett Coulter, who had maintained a careful expression of wrong patience throughout the morning, had gone very still. Crawford Hale asked for a recess. Judge Weston looked at him over the top of her glasses. We'll break for lunch at noon, counselor. That's 40 minutes. Tess Grover took the stand after the lunch recess. She was 28, and she was afraid Garrett could see it in the set of her shoulders, the way her hands were folded too carefully in her lap. But she was there. She had driven 4 hours to be there, and she sat in that witness box and told the jury what Brett Coulter's hands had felt like around her throat, and what the sheriff's office had felt like when the report she had filed disappeared, and what the following 3 years had felt like, carrying something that the official records said had never happened. What did it mean to you, Vivian asked, when Sheriff Coulter told you he would personally handle the investigation? I thought it meant it would be handled, Tess said. I thought the system was going to work. I went home, I waited, and then nothing. And I eventually understood that personally handle it meant make it go away. Crawford Hale cross-examined aggressively. He suggested Tess's account was colored by resentment, by the passage of time, by the desire to be part of something larger than her own experience. Tess Grover looked at him. I moved my daughter to a new school, she said, because Brett Coulter knew where she went. I installed 3 deadbolts on my apartment door. I didn't sleep in a room with a window on the ground floor for 2 years. That's not resentment, counselor. That's what being afraid looks like from the inside. Crawford Hale had no further questions. Laurel Finch testified next. She described the stairs in the apartment in Bozeman, the specific way the fall had gone, the restraining order that Brett had violated twice without consequence. She described the decision to move to Oregon not as an escape, but as a surrender the moment she had accepted that the county she lived in was not going to protect her. Then Nora Webb took the stand. She wore the professional clothes she had bought with her first paycheck from the veterinary clinic, a gray blazer, dark slacks, her hair pulled back neatly. She looked like someone who had been put back together from good materials and by her own hands, which was exactly what she was. Her hands were trembling when she sat down. Her voice was not. Vivian led her through it carefully, the meeting, the months of apparent goodness, the first bruise, the second, the night she had come home from the diner to find her daughter with a broken arm. Nora answered every question directly without embellishment, without defense. When Vivian asked her about the incidents she had chosen not to see, Nora answered those questions too. I saw things, Nora said, and I chose not to see them. I was exhausted and I was alone and I wanted something I had built to be real. I'm going to live with that for the rest of my life. Crawford Hale came forward for cross-examination with what Garrett recognized as the central strategy of the defense. The pivot to Nora as unfit mother to Garrett, as dangerous influence to the entire narrative, as a case of irresponsible adults around a child and the wrong man taking the blame. Isn't it true, Crawford Hale said, that you regularly left your daughter in the care of a man with an extensive violent criminal record? I left my daughter with a man she trusted, Nora said. A man who showed up for her every time she needed someone to show up. A Hells Angels member. A man who carried my daughter to the hospital at midnight and held her hand while they set her bone and sat beside her bed until 4 in the morning because she asked him not to leave. Nora looked at Crawford Hale with the flat, steady gaze of a woman who has already paid the highest price this situation could charge her and is therefore no longer afraid of it. That man is not the danger here. Brett Coulter is the danger here. And every person in this courtroom who has been told by someone in authority that what they clearly saw didn't happen, they know exactly what I'm talking about. The gallery reacted. Judge Weston called for order, and order was restored, but it took a moment. Crawford Hale had no further questions. Vivian's closing argument was 22 minutes long. She did not raise her voice once. She did not use the language of outrage or the rhetoric of injustice, though both would have been available to her and both would have been accurate. She laid out the pattern, 3 women, nearly a decade, the same methods, the same aftermath, the same phone calls to the same uncle with the precision of someone who has prepared so thoroughly that the truth requires no assistance from emotion. It simply needs to be seen. Brett Coulter is not a man who made a mistake, she said to the jury. He is a man who made a choice. The same choice with different women in different circumstances over the course of almost 10 years. And every time he made that choice, there was a mechanism in place to ensure he faced no consequences. That mechanism had a name, it wore a badge, and it is currently under federal investigation. She paused. You are not that mechanism. You are the correction of it. Brett Coulter has been protected for a very long time by things that should not have protected him. Today you are the thing that doesn't protect him. The jury deliberated for 2 hours and 51 minutes. Garrett sat in the hallway outside the courtroom with Devlin and waited. Nora was inside with Vivian. Tess and Laurel were together at the end of the hall talking in low voices, the particular closeness of people who have shared something that most people will never understand and have found in each other the relief of not having to explain it. Garrett looked at his hands. He thought about Owen Strand's office, about the question Strand had asked 3 weeks ago, not about Brett, not about the case, but about Frank Malone leaving on a Tuesday morning when Garrett was 10 years old, and the specific weight of that and what the boy who had been left had decided the world required of him to survive. Strand had said something in the most recent session that Garrett had been turning over since. The armor kept you alive, Strand had said. That's real. Don't let anyone tell you it wasn't necessary because it was. The question is just whether you still need it the same way. Whether the man you are now requires what the boy you were required. The jury door opened. They filed back in. The four persons stood, guilty on all counts: assault on a minor, child abuse causing grievous bodily harm, witness intimidation, violation of a protective order. Brett Coulter stood motionless while the verdict was read. Stuart Coulter, seated in the gallery behind the defense table, put his face in his hands. Crawford Hale, who had not lost a case in 11 years, sat with his pen still in his fingers and said nothing at all. 2 weeks later, sentencing, 7 years. And in a separate proceeding that received considerably more press coverage than the original trial, Sheriff Clint Coulter entered a guilty plea to obstruction of justice, destruction of evidence, and abuse of office. He lost his badge. He lost his pension. He received 18 months in federal custody. The 47 phone calls between him and his nephew were entered into the public record, and every case he had handled in the last decade was flagged for review. Alderman Stuart Coulter resigned from his seat in local government 2 days after sentencing, citing the need to focus on his family. The press release was 4 sentences long. No one asked many questions because everyone already knew the answers. Vivian called Garrett from her car in the courthouse parking lot immediately after sentencing. He was in the barn. Chloe was on Brave's back, moving in slow, careful circles around the paddock, while Devlin stood at the fence with his arms crossed, and the look of a man investing serious thought in something he would never admit was making him feel things. 7 years, Vivian said, and Clint Coulter is done. Garrett watched Chloe complete a circuit of the paddock. She was talking to Brave again, an ongoing monologue, the content of which Garrett could not hear from this distance, but which had been running with various interruptions for the better part of the morning. I thought I'd feel satisfied, Garrett said. I kept thinking that when this was over, there would be this, I don't know, moment, some clear feeling of it being right. And I just feel tired and grateful and sad that it had to happen at all. He paused. Is that normal? It's the truth about justice, Vivian said. Justice isn't satisfying. It's necessary. Those are different things. Satisfying would mean it undid what happened. It doesn't undo what happened. It just ensures that the same thing has a harder time happening again. A pause. That has to be enough. Most days it is. After the call, Garrett leaned against the fence beside Devlin. They watched Chloe ride. She named her Brave, Devlin said, not for the first time. He said it the way you say things you find continuously remarkable, testing whether the remarkableness has worn off yet. She named her Brave, Garrett confirmed. They were quiet for a while. The November that had started all of this had turned into December, and December in Montana had the quality of a hell breath, cold and still, and waiting for something to either break or release. Vivian called me, Devlin said, before she called you. Garrett looked at him. She said I was the reason she became a lawyer, that she thinks about me. He stared at the paddock. I didn't know that. You never asked? No. He considered this. I didn't ask because I didn't want to know. Because if I knew she thought about me, then what happened to me would, in a way, it was easier to let be theoretical. He watched Chloe complete another circle. Brett Coulter is in a cell right now. Gerald Ashby has been out of prison for 8 years, and I don't know where he is, and I've never looked. Because I told myself it was done. Is it done? Devlin was quiet for a long time. I'm working on it, he said. Garrett nodded. That was enough. 3 months after the verdict, Nora Webb told Garrett she had found a place. A small 2-bedroom rental on the north side of Harlow, close to the veterinary clinic where she had been working days since October. She had saved enough for first and last month's rent. She had bought a second-hand bed frame and a kitchen table and 6 mismatched chairs from an estate sale. The apartment had a window in the kitchen that looked out at a large cottonwood tree, and Chloe had stood in front of that window for a full minute before announcing that it was perfect because birds would come. They sat in Garrett's kitchen on a Sunday evening, the last Sunday before the move. Chloe asleep upstairs in the horse room, the farmhouse quiet in the way it had become quiet over these months. Not the empty quiet of before, but a quiet that had been inhabited and was different for it. "I need to tell you something," Nora said. "Okay." "I got a letter from Brett." She watched Garrett's face. His therapist helped him write it. It's part of his rehabilitation program, letters of accountability to the people he hurt. Garrett was still. "He takes responsibility," Nora said. "For Chloe, for me, for Tess, for Laurel. He says he understands what he did. He says he's working on himself. He says he doesn't expect forgiveness." She looked at the table. "I don't know if it's real. I don't know if any of it is real or if it's something he learned to say because it reduces his sentence or because his therapist told him to. I genuinely don't know." "Does it matter?" Garrett asked. She looked up. "Does it matter whether it's real," he said, "for what you decide to do with it?" Nora was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke slowly, as though finding the words while she said them. "No," she said, "I don't think it does, because his change, if it's real, if it's not, that's his business, his work, not mine. I spent too long waiting for Brett to be different, waiting for the situation to be different, waiting for something outside myself to change so that I could feel safe." She met Garrett's eyes. "I'm done waiting for external things. My healing is mine. That's enough work for one person." Garrett looked at this woman, the woman who had arrived in the house next door 14 months ago with 2 suitcases and her daughter, and the particular careful wariness of someone who had learned to assess situations quickly and act accordingly. He thought about the woman he had sat with in a hospital waiting room, and in his own kitchen, and in the long specific dark of many nights between then and now. "I'm proud of you," he said. She smiled. A real smile, not the effortful kind, not the managing kind, the kind that comes from a place deep enough that it doesn't require any assistance from the muscles around it. "I'm proud of me too," she said. "First time I've been able to say that." Before Garrett could respond, the sound came distant at first, then closer, then all around them, shaking the kitchen windows in their frames. Motorcycles. Not one or two. Many. The cumulative thunder of multiple large engines arriving together, the sound of it filling the yard and then the road and then everything, the particular resonance of 30-some Harley Davidsons running in close formation. Garrett had not invited them. Big Hank had simply known. 48 hours ago, Garrett had called him not to invite anyone, just to talk the way you call the person who has known you longest when something important is ending and something new is trying to begin, and you need to say that out loud to someone who will understand what it cost. Big Hank had listened and asked 2 questions and said nothing else. Garrett had assumed that was the end of it. He had underestimated Big Hank. Chloe came downstairs in her pajamas with her hair sideways from sleep, drawn by the sound the way children are drawn by things too large and interesting to stay asleep through. She pushed through the screen door and stood on the porch and looked at the road. 32 motorcycles. Chrome catching the December moonlight, engines settling to idle one by one as they pulled into Garrett's driveway and onto the grass alongside it, the sound dropping from thunder to a low collective rumble and then to silence as 32 men cut their engines in something that was not quite synchronized, but was close enough that it had the quality of intention. Chloe stood very still. Big Hank climbed off his bike. He was 61 years old, 6 feet 4 inches, with a white beard and hands that had the dimensions of something you would use to build a house. He walked up to the porch, and when he reached the steps, he went down on one knee so that he and Chloe were at the same level. "Happy birthday, little one," he said. His voice, which was ordinarily approximately the volume of a moderate earthquake, had found a register somewhere well below that. "The boys wanted to come wish you well. That all right with you?" Chloe looked at him, looked at the 31 men behind him standing beside their bikes in the cold December night, looked at Garrett. Garrett nodded. She looked back at Big Hank. "Did you bring presents?" she asked. Big Hank laughed, a sound that started somewhere around his knees and made the porch railings vibrate. "Yes, ma'am, we did." What followed was by any reasonable accounting the most improbable birthday party in the history of Harlow County. 32 Hells Angels ate chocolate cake with strawberries. They drank the lemonade that Chloe had made herself that afternoon, which had too much sugar and not enough lemon and was absolutely perfect. They took turns giving pony rides, Brave circling the paddock patiently with the dignity of an animal who has decided that this is simply what her evenings are now. Chloe made Big Hank wear a paper crown that she had colored herself purple and yellow, slightly asymmetrical, with the word King spelled out in careful capital letters. He wore it for 3 hours without complaint and without removing it even once. A man named Razor, who had a scar from his left ear to his chin and had done things in his life that would not survive. The light of public examination was conscripted into a tea party in the barn. He sat on an upturned bucket, held his pinky out with great seriousness, and said, "Quite right and delightful," in a British accent that was not remotely accurate and was the funniest thing Garrett had witnessed in years. 4 men attempted cartwheels at Chloe's instruction. None of them could do it. All of them tried. When Devlin carried the cake out with 6 candles lit, 32 voices assembled themselves into a rendition of Happy Birthday that was enthusiastic in inverse proportion to its musicality. Chloe stood before the cake in the firelight of the yard, her face luminous. Her cast long gone, both hands free the cold, not touching her the way cold touches people who are fully, completely warm from the inside. She closed her eyes. She blew all 6 candles out in one breath. "What did you wish for?" Devlin asked. "Can't tell. It won't come true." "Give us something. Just a hint." She thought about it with the genuine deliberateness of a child to whom wishes are serious business. "I wished," she said, "that everyone who is sad could have a Mr. Iron." The yard went quiet. 32 men who had between them accumulated enough history and damage and complicated truth to fill several courtrooms, and not a few hospital records stood in the December dark and felt what a 6-year-old girl had just said land in them the way only simple, true things can land, without warning, without defense, directly in the place where things actually matter. Big Hank cleared his throat. He took Garrett aside while Devlin organized the second round of pony rides. "She's something else," Big Hank said. "Yeah. Listen." Big Hank looked at him with the direct, unperformative gaze of a man who has known Garrett Malone longer than most and has the measure of him in ways that don't require words, but occasionally require them anyway. "I know you stepped back from the table. I know what that cost you. I want you to know that what you did this year, the way you handled this, that's the strongest thing any man has ever done in this chapter. In any chapter I've heard of." Garrett shook his head. "I didn't do anything. I just didn't hit someone." Big Hank was quiet for a moment. "Garrett," he said, "for a man like you, not hitting someone was the hardest possible thing you could have done. And you did it not because someone made you, not because you were afraid of the consequences, but because a little girl needed you to be something different than what you'd always been." He glanced toward the paddock where Chloe was directing pony traffic with the authority of someone born to it. "That's not weakness. That's not restraint. That is the kind of strength that most men spend their whole lives thinking they have and never actually find." He clapped Garrett on the shoulder and walked back toward the gathering. Garrett stood where he was for a moment, holding the weight of those words, checking them, deciding slowly that they were true. Later, after the bikes had filed back down the road one by one and the cake was down to crumbs, and Brave had been settled in her stall with what Chloe considered an appropriate amount of gratitude for her service, Garrett found himself on the porch with the people who had made it through. Nora on the step with a mug of coffee looking at the cottonwood at the edge of the yard. Devlin on the porch swing with Claire Bowman, a nurse he had been seeing for 2 months, a woman with a steady presence who had met Devlin at an AA meeting where he was a speaker and had liked immediately not what he had been, but what he was becoming. Claire's head was against his shoulder, his hand around hers with a careful tentativeness That was the most hopeful thing about him. The evening was cold and still and golden in the way that evenings are golden when they are ending in a way worth remembering. I got a letter, Nora said quietly. She had already told Garrett this. She was saying it again for herself, working through it the way you work through a thing by saying it out loud more than once until it loses the power to ambush you. Devlin looked at her. From Brett. His therapist helped him. He takes responsibility. She was quiet a moment. I believe he wrote the words. I don't know what they mean beyond that. And I've decided that's all right. It's enough to know that whatever he does from here, it's his, not mine. Claire reached over and touched Nora's hand briefly. Just a touch. The language of women who recognize something in each other. That's the whole thing, isn't it? Claire said quietly. Figuring out what's yours to carry and what isn't. Nora nodded. From inside the house, a small voice. Mr. Iron. Garrett went to the screen door. Chloe was standing at the bottom of the stairs in her pajamas, one hand on the banister, the barn cat whining around her feet, with the devoted inefficiency of an animal that has concluded that this particular human requires constant attention. I caught a firefly, she said. She held up her cupped hands. Between her palms, a small pulse of light. Garrett came inside and looked at the light blinking between her fingers. What are you going to do with it? He asked. She thought about it, looked at her hands. The light pulsed once, twice, steady and small. Then she opened her palms. The firefly drifted upward, blinking, navigating by whatever compass fireflies use, and disappeared through the screen door into the December darkness outside. Isn't it too cold for fireflies? Garrett said. This one was special, Chloe said, with the complete confidence of a child who understands that special things operate by different rules. She looked at him. Mr. Iron. Yeah. Is your real name Garrett? It is. She considered this for a moment the way she considered things she was deciding were important. I like Garrett better, she said. Iron is what you are to everybody else. Garrett is what you are to me. He did not trust himself to say anything. She seemed to understand that. She came and sat beside him on the bottom stair. The cat arranged itself between them with the finality of an animal that has made a decision. The firefly was somewhere outside in the cold, still blinking free. They sat there for a while, the man and the little girl in the warm quiet of the house, not needing to fill the space with anything. The next morning, Garrett came downstairs to find a new drawing on the kitchen table, placed where he would see it first thing. Crayons, the good news set, not yet worn down, lined up beside it. The drawing showed a large man on a motorcycle. The motorcycle enormous and detailed in the way that children's important subjects are always enormous and detailed. The man himself, a collection of confident lines, a leather vest, big arms. And underneath in the careful, deliberate letters of a child who has recently learned that writing is a kind of power, my friend Garrett. The good kind of strong. He stood there for a long time looking at it. Outside, the Montana morning was doing something extraordinary. The kind of winter light that happens only a few times a year when the angle of the sun and the ice crystals in the air conspire to turn the whole world briefly gold. The barn and the paddock and the cottonwood tree all lit from within. Bray visible through the fence, looking out at the morning with the mild philosophical interest of a horse who has decided that most mornings are worth paying attention to. He could hear from upstairs the sound of Chloe beginning to wake up, the small, particular sounds of a child whose first thought upon waking is usually what is the most interesting thing that could happen today, and whose second thought is usually how to make that happen. Garrett Malone stood in his kitchen in the Gold Montana morning and looked at the drawing on his table. He was not Iron exactly. Not anymore. Or not only. He was the man who had answered the phone on a Thursday night in November when he almost hadn't, who had carried a 5-year-old girl through a dark house and kept his word to her in every way that counted, who had sat in a parking lot for 15 minutes and then walked into a room and said the things he had never said out loud and found that the saying of them did not unmake him, who had stood on a porch with his fists unclenched, while something small and clear came through a screen door and changed what he was in the middle of becoming. The beast was still there. It would always be there. He understood that now had made peace with the permanence of it, the way you make peace with a scar that has healed clean. It was part of him. It had kept him alive when nothing else could, but it was not running him anymore. It was not the whole story. He folded the drawing carefully and put it in the inside pocket of his vest. Then he put a pot of coffee on and went to the bottom of the stairs and called up, "Chloe, you want to help feed Brave?" A sound from upstairs that was not quite words, but was unmistakably yes. The gold morning waited outside. He opened the door and walked into it.